Who has something on their mind?
Well, I have a question about, last night Allegra talked about the perfections.
Yes.
And one of the perfections is wisdom.
Yes.
So can you give what you would consider, when I say the perfections, I kind of draw a blank on wisdom. What is the Buddhist perception of wisdom?
Okay, yeah, that's good. Well, the perfection of wisdom, actually in the Eightfold Path, which you're familiar with, it corresponds to right view and right understanding. You're familiar with those, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's, in the one sense, there's a right view and right understanding as the understanding of the tenets of the Dharma, of the doctrine, of the Four Noble Truths is part of right understanding. And so the practice of the perfection of wisdom obviously begins with learning those basic teachings about right, that make up right view and right understanding. And then they become more than intellectual in the process of the perfection, in the process of the progress of insight. They become the purification of view, the purification of overcoming doubt, the purification of knowledge of what is and is not the way, and the purification by way of knowledge and vision. And so that's sort of the middle process of the perfection of wisdom is the cultivation of these purifications. The culmination of the perfection of wisdom is, of course, in the awakening itself, to so that you have direct knowledge and experience of the ultimate truth that this is all leading to. So we start with truths at the level, at the relative level, and then we move through the process of correcting our way of thinking and understanding and acquiring deep insight into these same truths, which involves things like the insight into the three characteristics and so forth. And then it culminates, of course, in the wisdom, which is the Buddha knowledge, the wisdom of the Buddha mind. So,
what are the three characteristics?
The three characteristics refers to the three characteristics of all phenomena or all existence, different ways that we can translate it into English. That they are all impermanent, that they are all empty of a self-nature, and that grasping to them in any way is a cause of suffering. And so that the three characteristics of phenomena are impermanence, selflessness, non-self, and dissatisfactoriness.
So when you hear teachings on the Prajnaparamita, is that a relative form of wisdom?
That's expressing verbally through negation the ultimate truth. So the Prajnaparamita sutras are sutras that express in words and in verses the ultimate truth, which cannot it's ineffable, cannot be described. And so it's all in the negative. So in the Heart Sutra, it's, it's all negatives. There's no this and there's no that, and so forth. And so, but what they are is attempting to span. They are teachings that attempt to span the abyss that lies between words and the conceptual mind and the reality that lies beyond both of those. Are they relative? Is that what you asked?
Well, I'm just when I read Prajnaparamita teachings in English, they're real specific instructions.
Yeah.
So to me, that's relative.
Okay, well,
right?
You're reading Prajnaparamita practice instructions.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's because the person doing the practice is that's relative. That's relative truth. That is relative reality that you're in when you're doing those practices. So to practice, each of these is a perfection. So you start where you are, and you work in the process of perfection. So in the perfection of wisdom practice, you start where you are, which is you are a being filled with desire and aversion, attached to a view of self, believing in the self-existent reality of external phenomena, and so that's where you have to start. and as the perfection of wisdom proceeds, then you begin to approach in a variety of different ways, understanding of ultimate truth as opposed to relative. The interesting thing is that all the things in the Buddhist teaching, you probably already noticed, they're all linked together too. They form circles. So, for example, take the Four Noble Truths. The truth of dukkha, and the truth of the origin of dukkha, and the cessation of dukkha, and the path to the cessation of dukkha, which is the fourth. And that is the Eightfold Path. And then we look at the Eightfold Path consists of right view and right understanding. And right understanding is the Four Noble Truths. So we've already got a circle right away in that. And all of these teachings go like over and over again. You find that they circle back upon themselves and that they're interconnected, so that you could take, as you go through the Eightfold Path, it takes you into these other things. A lot of people think it's funny the way Buddhism is always full of, the four of this and the five that and the three this and everything else like that. But that's a very deliberate part of it. They're called, the word in Pali and Sanskrit is called matika. And it's actually the root for the English word matrix. But the literal meaning is list. And so the teaching was deliberately formulated as a system of interconnected lists. So you could start with any list, and from it will eventually lead to all of the others. So if you start with the Four Noble Truths, it will take you to the Eightfold Path. And eventually this is going to take you to the three characteristics, and all of these other lists, because they're all interconnected in that way. So the same thing is true. A later list is the Six Perfections, but it was sort of deliberately constructed, well, it was originally constructed as 10 perfections and then was later, it was a little bit of redundancy in there, so it was made down to 6. But that 6 is constructed in such a way that it ultimately leads to the entirety of the Dhamma, of the doctrine that's taught as you expand each one of them and go into it. Because, well, as you know, the perfection of virtue takes you, of course, into both the precepts and into three of the elements of the Eightfold Noble Path. So that's just one illustration of how they're all interconnected as matika, which in their plurality creates not just lists but a matrix. And you've probably noticed that in all the Dharma talks that you've ever listened to, how one thing is always kind of leading into another. And that's very deliberate. That was a very ingenious way that's constructed. So of those perfections, or of the things specifically that make up the perfection of wisdom, right view and right understanding and the purification of view and the purification by overcoming doubt and so forth. Do any of those jump out at anyone, or should I just start talking about them in general? About purification by overcoming doubt? Okay. Well, now that's actually related to one of what are called the 5 hindrances, the 5th of which is skeptical doubt. And this is this hindrance manifests in many, many ways over and over again. From the first time that you're acquainted with the Dharma and the practice of meditation, through until you achieve the first path, the path of the stream enterer, who is the first stage of awakening, where the fetter of doubt is permanently overcome. So that's an interesting one to start with. There's an interesting relationship between faith and doubt. The Buddha never expected anyone to take anything on faith in the sense that we might take the belief in God or life after death or something like that as an article of faith. But faith is very important in terms of having within you the confidence, the belief, the trust that you must have in order to successfully pursue both the study and the practice of the Dharma, because it's not easy. It can be discouraging. It can be confusing, and there's all kinds of different ways that doubt can insert itself. So what counteracts doubt is faith in the sense of trust and confidence, but not blind faith, and not blind faith in the sense of there being some virtue in believing something because you have been told it without being able to satisfy yourself as to its actual truth. The Buddha said, don't believe anything that I say on my authority. Don't believe anything because it's written in sacred scriptures. But any teaching should be tested, and it should be tested based on your own experience. It should work. There's several things. It should make sense to you in terms of your own experience. you should be able to test it and satisfy yourself as to its truth. But of course, sometimes that takes a little while. So that's where where faith does come in, is it's got to give you what it takes to give something a true and fair test. And what doubt does is it gets in the way of that. It dissuades you, it saps you of your energy, of your resolve, of the diligence that it takes to satisfy yourself that something is indeed true or is not true for yourself. So the things that we doubt, when doubt arises, we doubt ourselves and our own capability. We will doubt the specific practices or teachings that we're receiving. And we will doubt the teacher that we're receiving them from. And of course we can doubt the truth of the Dharma and the tenets of the Dharma as a whole. So these are the targets of doubt in our mind, doubt and uncertainty. And whenever doubt arises, of course, it feeds the other hindrances. When doubt is present, it will quickly lead to procrastination, lethargy, laziness, a lack of energy and resolve to pursue the practice. And then it will also lead to thoughts of other things that might be more rewarding and more satisfying, say better uses of our time and energy, or at least more immediately attractive and appealing uses of our time and energy. So when doubt arises, it brings the hindrance of procrastination and lethargy. That's often presented in things you read of sloth and torpor, which are a couple of very Victorian terms, which are terrible terms. Sloth is one of the 7 deadly sins. And as a matter of fact, it has hardly any other clear definition in the English language other than being one of the 7 deadly sins. But it's also the name of a South American animal that hangs by its feet from the branches of trees and eats ants. And torpor, you have this. So, but there is a procrastination. We could call it laziness too, which is laziness is accurate in a sense, but it has a certain pejorative flavor to it that we probably don't need to impose upon ourselves. So that's why I like procrastination.
Even if we are really lazy.
Yes. Yeah. Even if you are really lazy. If it helps for you to think of it as laziness, then you should. But so I like procrastination. And likewise, rather than torpor, lethargy or something that denotes the lack of energy and enthusiasm, which can lead to the feeling of fatigue and tiredness and boredom and falling asleep. So doubt opens you up to these things. And as a matter of fact, when these things are present, you could always look to see if doubt is any part of what has caused them to be there. It might not be. Of course, they can always arise on their own for their own reasons, but doubt can lead to them. And of course, what is doubt in the mind? Basically, you're engaged in an activity or a process and it is our nature that we have some expectation of a reward or of accomplishment or some kind of fruits of that. And doubt is sort of the built-in mechanism that keeps us from wasting our time too much in fruitless activities. So that when we've been doing something for a while without a payoff, then the doubt mechanism turns on and begins to investigate the whole proposition to make sure that you're not just wasting your time. So in that sense, it's kind of a good thing, and as a matter of fact, doubt is very healthy, because it's healthy in the sense that it brings you to examine, to question, to investigate, to evaluate. Where it's a bad thing, though, is where it's just an emotional state that robs you of your resolve to continue in the activity, or worse yet, gets you in these endless little cycles of the mind where you're just, it's like a dog chasing its tail, where you keep cycling the same useless and unproductive thoughts over and over again, and you're caught in a loop of uncertainty, which the only way you can get out of is to come to a point where you can evaluate whatever process you're engaged in and say, well, I've really given this my best shot for what seems like more than a reasonable amount of time, and it hasn't paid off. So it's time to look at something else. So doubt can do that, and that's a good thing for doubt to do. But it's only a good thing if you've done that. If you have been diligently pursuing the process, and you put a reasonable amount of time and effort and energy into it, then you can say for sure that the doubt is serving a useful purpose by causing you to reflect and examine. But doubt is always going to arise when you're making demands upon yourself of any kind, and you're not getting a payoff that you can understand clearly. So this is it has to be dealt with, and of course we're capable of overcoming doubt. Otherwise, we would never get anywhere. Well, there's some people who aren't very good at overcoming doubt. We know those people. We've all met those kinds of people that no matter what they do, they begin to doubt themselves or what they're doing after a period of time, and they become paralyzed by it, right? So that's just one of those common examples in the world of how a mental mechanism which could otherwise be useful and beneficial can be very destructive if it's out of control. And so there's a recognition of that fact in acknowledging doubt as a hindrance and seeing the role that it plays. There's healthy doubt and there's skeptical doubt. Well, that may not be a clear translation into English, because skeptical doubt you can be a healthy skeptic. The kind of doubt that is unwholesome and that's a problem, or doubt becomes a problem when it begins to be a kind of faith of its own. When it begins to be the faith that this is not going to work, or that I can't do it, or that sort of thing. So, now, it comes up over and over again. It comes up when you first decided to learn to meditate, and it seemed like you weren't having much progress. You experienced doubt. And you probably experienced doubt directed at several of its different possible targets. That, well, it's me. It's just the kind of person I am. other people can do this, but maybe I can't. Or it may have been directed at that to practice. And a lot of people, when they start to meditate, will try several different practices. But by now you already know that the solution to doubt is to give it a good try. And of course, you've done that meditation and you've enjoyed some success. And then, of course, as you go along and you come to the next stage or the next hurdle or the next plateau or whatever it is, and doubt begins to emerge again, you can call upon your success in the past to help give you the confidence that you need to proceed. Of course, you can look around you at other people and you can draw confidence from that. And you can also use your own growing wisdom to recognize that the only way that you can determine whether it's going to work or not is to give it your seriously best shot. And so that's how we deal with doubt. As a matter of fact, the antidote of doubt is said to be sustained effort. So, which is pretty much the exact opposite of what doubt is itself, which is it's interrupted effort. It's inhibited effort, and so sustained effort overcomes interrupted effort. To overcome doubt in practice is to do the practice diligently and experience the arising of the results as you continue through time. To overcome doubt in terms of the teachings is to examine them carefully, and if you have trouble understanding them, to seek some kind of explanation that resolves the difficulty. And I'll tell you one thing about intellectually understanding the Dharma, and this is the same thing that I used to tell my science students, anatomy students and physiology students and neurology students when I taught, is that if you've tried your best to understand something and it still doesn't make sense to you, then there's probably something wrong with the way you're trying to put it together. There's some important piece of information that you've got backwards, for example. And when you identify what that is and flip it around the right way, all the pieces of the puzzle will fit. Or sometimes it's because there's a piece missing. That if something is comprehensible, then it's comprehensible to all of us. And there was a physicist once, I can't remember who it was.
Occam?
Who?
Occam's razor?
No. He said, Occam was a medieval philosopher, but I really like Occam's razor. I shave my mind with it all. Anyway, this is a modern physicist. He said that if you can't explain this to a child, you don't understand it yourself, and I think that's really true. You know. So sometimes there's a lot of information that has to be methodically built up over time to understand something. So, for you to open a book on quantum physics and understand what that page says, you would of course have to have gone through the process of cumulatively learning the pieces. But if you had done that, you would be able to understand everything on the page. Maybe that's not the best example because Actually, there are some people who probably aren't going to master certain mathematical ideas in their lifetime. Well, you could take another example would be, say, medical text. And I think, they don't usually involve any kind of mental skills like advanced mathematics that some people are especially gifted in and other people don't have at all. You go open any page of a medical text or a physiology book, and if you learned the necessary background material, you could understand everything on that page. And I can say with confidence, there's no part of the necessary background material that just about anybody couldn't learn. What makes it difficult when you first look at it is you don't have the background. But piece by piece, it's all easily assimilated and understood. So, in learning these seemingly very complex and confusing teachings, if you get all of the pieces together in the right way, they should cease to be confusing. And you can overcome doubt through the application of reason and understanding. You can overcome doubt in terms of the system saying something that's comprehensible. Now, in terms of what it says, for example, the system says you don't have the self that you think you have, or things are empty. Okay. You can completely understand intellectually the hypothesis there without being able to engage that as a reality. So, in order to overcome doubt at that level, it means that you have to have direct experience that confirms the things that you're trying to understand. And of course, here's where all the different strands come together, because you have to have the practice, you have to have the theoretical understanding, and then this will give rise to the direct experience, and then that doubt too will be overcome. The fetter of doubt that's overcome when a person experiences awakening, when the attachment to the view of personal self is eradicated, and the emptiness of formations is directly experienced, that experience removes doubt in all of these issues of Dharma that before you had to more or less accept on faith and trust. And so this is how the process of overcoming doubt works, at least in the context of Buddhism. I think it's pretty much universally true of everything. But I did mention that there is, in the progress of insight, there's a particular part of that that's referred to specifically as the purification by overcoming doubt. And that is preceded by the purification of view. And they are very directly connected. They work in sequence. You have to have a purification of view before you can achieve the intellectual and intuitive purification by overcoming doubt with regard to these what are considered the most fundamental insights that are required on this particular spiritual path. the three characteristics are an example of that: impermanence, emptiness, selflessness, and suffering. So this is a very good thing for us to talk about, purification of view, what that means. And I've touched on it in previous talks during this retreat. We normally think that we are a particular kind of thing, a self, in a world of other kinds of things. And the process of purification of view is to change that perspective so that first of all, that we see ourselves as a series of experiences. You are a series of experiences. And in making that shift, what you're doing is you're recognizing that the appearance of being a self in a world of things is actually a mental construct. But you can discover and overcome doubt and satisfy yourself that indeed a more accurate description of the only reality you've ever known, of every reality that you've ever known, its far more accurate description is that you are a series of experiences. Can you all see that? So this is the very beginning of right view. Is we'll drop the other way of looking at things and realize that, well, all there has been is a series of experiences, and these experiences are causally connected. So they create a sequence, and the experiences are related to each other in a causal way. And as a being, as a human being, you could think of yourself in this present moment. The present is this experience that's standing at the top of all these experiences that conditioned it and led up to it. Why are you here in this place, doing what you're doing, hearing what you're hearing, everything else? It's a result of all of those preceding experiences. So when we realize that reality is experience, and so here we are, we're in an experience right now. And what does this reality consist of? If you examine it carefully, and this is what your meditation helps you to see, is that in any given present moment, there is consciousness and there is some object of consciousness. And that is what reality consists of in the moment. And in any given present moment, the object of consciousness will be of two types. And here is that distinction. We start off, it's really easy for us to divide the universe into the material and the mental. That which we can feel and taste and touch, and that which we can only know within our minds. Right? That which is dependent upon the senses, and that which is on the five physical senses, and that which is known by means of the mind sense. And other ways that you can think of the same division of objects of consciousness is that they are external and they are internal, that they are self and other. There's all kinds of different ways that you can make this distinction. But let's just stick with the mental and the material for a moment. And we're all, I'm sure, absolutely clear that yes, you can account for all possible objects of experience are either mental in nature or they relate in some way to the material, to the physical, right? And then we examine this a little more closely, and we realize that we never have any experience of the presumed physical reality directly. We only know it by virtue of the sensations that we experience. And you can all probably agree with me with this. And this is the part where you may start to experience doubt as we go beyond this, but it's easy to resolve that doubt through careful examination to satisfy yourself that it's true. Okay? So when you close your eyes, the dominant sense is vision. So when you close your eyes and meditate, it's a lot easier to satisfy yourself that, as a matter of fact, moment by moment, as your experience, as this sequence of causally related experiences unfolds, moment by moment, the objects of your consciousness are either sensations or they are the other kinds of mental objects, the more obvious kinds of mental objects, such as feelings, thoughts, memories, emotions, mental images as opposed to visual images, recollected sound or words heard in the mind as opposed to sounds and words heard with the ears, and so forth, right? So we've got quite a range there of different mental objects. Well, not so much. Just thoughts, memories, images, emotions, so forth. And the sensations. And so now you can start to benefit from this developing right view, this accurate view, this more, well, yes, it's a more accurate view, it's a more real view of what you are and everything. So there are sensations, and then there are mental objects, and you look at the dance, the interaction between these. So you hear a sound, and your mind associates the sound with a kind of object. And you realize that it associates that sound with a kind of object due to past experience that have involved other senses at other times. And so you can see how your mind creates within itself a world of objects, but that you have no direct contact with that world of objects. And really, the only thing that validates your mind's assumption about the way those objects are is if you are able to experience them repeatedly in the same way. So here's another interesting thing about this. Okay, so being is experience, or being is experiencing. And reality is what you experience. And we start to recognize that what we are experiencing are sensations and then mental formations to account for the sensations. So we think back to the way that we normally perceive the world. We think about things as existing. Let's say that this exists, and that what that word means, exists. It means to stand outside of. That's what it means in Latin. And specifically what it means is to stand outside of the mind. So when we say this exists, we're making a proposition that this stands outside of the mind, And if I thought I saw the ghost of my grandfather and I looked again and it wasn't there, I would say it doesn't exist. It doesn't stand outside of the mind. But this bowl, every time I experience it the same way. And so I infer that it exists. So reality is what we experience, and existence is what the mind infers. It's purely inference. And so we start to develop right view by pursuing this. We examine the sensations that are the basis for all of our mind's inferences, and we find that they're constantly changing. We examine the formations of our mind that are based on those sensations, and we find that they're constantly changing too. This won't always be here. Someday I could come in here and it will be gone. There's all kinds of different ways that it could cease to be here, but someday it might no longer be there. And this is indeed the nature of absolutely everything that the mind creates its inferences about. That although it may satisfy for some period of time the appearance of being an enduring entity, everything eventually passes away. Everything eventually ceases to be there. So we can recognize that everything is impermanent. We can examine the succession of mental states as they occur and see the relationship between them. Reality constantly changes. A fly lands on my head. That's a sensation. I identify it as a fly. That's a perception. That's a mental object. The sensation is unpleasant. It produces a tickling. And I don't like that feeling. And so there arises, and that's another mental object. The feeling is a mental object. So I had a sensation that led to one kind of mental object, the perception of the fly, and also another kind of mental object, an unpleasant feeling. And then yet another mental object arises, which is the impulse and the intention to get rid of the fly. And here's an interesting thing that you have to actually examine, because it's something that we manage to live our lives without noticing too well. Or even we know it, but we don't really know it. And that's that all that ever happened was that the intention arose to brush the fly off the forehead. And then the sensations of the arm moving occurred. And then other sensations of the hand brushing the fly away occurred. And we fill that in, we say, oh, I brushed the fly off my head. But when we examine closely, we find that no, just as the initial sensation of the fly led to a whole train of mental objects, so does a kind of mental object, an intention, lead to a whole series of sensations. And so there is this interplay, this dance between nama and rupa, between sensation and mental phenomena. And we see that it's all causally related. And when we examine this, we can examine phenomena as they occur, experiences as they unfold, one right after another. And that we can see when certain things happen, that the perceptions that we have are based on our cumulative past experience. And the kind of feelings that they arouse in us are likewise based on our past conditioning. And that the impulses and intentions that arise are also based on our past conditioning. So this is where we begin to see that reality as experience, as a series of causally connected experiences, starts to become really obvious. Now, none of this is difficult to understand, right? Anybody have trouble following any of this? I don't think so. Nobody really would. Yeah? You did? Yeah?
But you also have the physical, actual movement of the arm
Yeah.
to the forehead.
Yes.
I mean, you had the sensation of
You had the sensation of the...
movement and the sensation of the hand, the fingers on the forehead.
Yeah.
But you also had some physical movement of some physical
Well,
entity.
Okay.
I mean, not an unchanging and permanent entity, but still a physical.
Okay, but let's look at this. What you had is the sensations. And if your eyes were closed, they may have been only bodily sensations, but if your eyes were open, they would have been both bodily and visual. But nevertheless, you only had the sensations of the arm moving up to your forehead to brush away the fly. Your mind inferred that there actually existed an arm and that the arm actually moved. Because have you ever had a dream that you've done something?
Oh,
Of course you have. But you know, in fact, that the bodily parts that moved in the dream didn't actually move in in the inferred reality. Right? So, yes, that's good. That's a wonderful example, wonderful question. That's why I say, we come to this point, these things are really easy to understand, but we need to really get into them we can think we understand them before we really understand them. And you need to keep going back and examining them more and more closely. And this is the process of overcoming doubt, is basically to keep having direct experiences that confirm and distinguish between what's being proposed and our normal way of thinking of things. So I don't know, did I satisfy you on that one?
Well, I think your arm exists, right?
Well,
that would be relative reality, right?
that would be what?
That would be relative reality.
We would say in relative reality, your arm exists, right? And we're starting from relative reality where we do not doubt or question at all for a moment that your arm exists, and it exists exactly the way it looks and feels to us. That's relative reality. And what we're doing is we're coming to the point of saying, well, at some point, what you will discover in the process of developing right view and then by overcoming doubt, you'll come to the point that you'll know with a certainty that there is no way for you to ever know for sure that your arm exists or not. But if you've been doing enough exploration, what you will know for certain is that your arm does not exist the way it appears to you. That's what's interesting about it. Okay? There's no way in this process of investigation and rational evaluation that you can come to a point and say with certainty, there definitely exists something outside of my mind corresponding to arm.
I think your cat definitely exists outside of our minds.
Only in his mind and your mind.
Your cat wants to hear the Dharma talk.
It did that the other night outside my trailer, and I thought that someone was banging on it, and I just like...
So anyway, I don't need to. I don't think we need to go into this in detail, but I think anybody who wants to truly understand this teaching does need to think about it and explore it. But I'll tell you that just using, absolutely not suggesting at all that reality is a dream, which is a facile and easy way to oversimplify things. But if you compare the two states that we have of dreaming and waking, although it can become obvious that something's a dream, you can be certain that something's a dream. You can never be absolutely certain that everything's not a dream. Right? So you can just use these two very common, ordinary mental states to satisfy yourself at least the possibility that perhaps there is no such thing as an arm. And I'll tell you what you'll end up with when you pursue it as far as you can possibly go, experientially or intellectually, either way, or both, is that you can never with certainty either affirm or deny that there exists something outside of your mind corresponding to your arm, because it could just be a dream. But if you once you have cultivated and applied once you cultivate and apply right view, and the application is important. You've got to keep thinking in terms of, I am a series of experiences consisting of sensation and mental formations, and observe the interaction between the sensations and the mental formations. You will find all kinds of circumstances in which you would have to say, if there does exist something outside of my mind corresponding to the objects that my mind proposes to account for sensations, that with certainty it is not the way it appears to be in my mind. Some things that are obvious and easy. We see another person in a particular way, and we are certain that that person is the way that we see them. And then, subsequently, something will happen, and we'll realize that they are not that way at all. This is a common experience everyone's had, right? So, there's all kinds of examples. Like when we get past the level of things like this, where there's a very high level of consistency of our experiencing and re-experiencing of the same object, when we get to more complex levels of being, entities that we interact with, like other people, or whole situations, we find that they are very, that there's a huge element of uncertainty in our perceptions. And we see that two people in the same circumstance, one's happy and one's miserable. So they're living in different realities, although there's the same, the purported external objects are all the same. And somebody likes the taste of one food and somebody doesn't. And so, there is a level beyond which in our experience we begin to recognize that all of our life is filled with experiences where things are not the way they appear to us to be. When we carry this to a further level, we find that there's no bottom to this process. And even with this, as I know that you know, this seems solid. But it's not solid, right? It's 99 point, I don't know how many decimal nines of its volume is completely empty space. And as a matter of fact, even the pursuit of small objects scattered in this empty space to create the illusion of solidity, when pursued scientifically, we find that those tiny objects disappear as well. Relativity theory turns those tiny objects into curvatures of space-time. And other fields of physics find them to be total. They are imaginary points from which the field, the force fields of the four different kinds of, I don't need to get into physics. Anyway, they correspond to imaginary points that mathematically define the origin of fields. So, the solidity of this, even by virtue of science, disappears. So, if you sincerely pursue this kind of investigation, you will satisfy yourself intellectually that absolutely nothing is, from its own side, the way it appears to you in your mind. And that's even assuming that there is something outside of your mind to account for the sensations out of which your mind built the appearance of the object in the first place. That is very interesting, isn't it? It has all kinds of consequences for everything else. I mean, I could go on this for a long time, but this develops into a very complete understanding of emptiness. And it changes your life. It also is the basis for understanding the Four Noble Truths, that the truth of dukkha, that life is filled with dissatisfaction, pain and suffering. But that this dukkha is of two types. There's dukkha that originates with the senses, and there's a sensation. And then there is another kind of dukkha, domanassa dukkha, which originates in the mind, and which we would call suffering or grief or the mental form of unpleasantness. And so, as we go through life, experiencing things as unpleasant, the sensations that are unpleasant are inevitably a part of human existence. But the suffering that's generated by the mind in response to the sensations, that is empty. So we have the object that seems to cause our pain is empty. We don't know its real nature. But reality, remember, being is experience is reality. The reality is there's pain. Right? But the next moment of experience is there's not only pain, but there's suffering. And that suffering is completely a mental creation, and it's completely empty. And this means that if we can understand the origin of suffering, the second truth, then we can bring about the cessation of suffering through bringing about the cessation of that which leads to suffering. And then what we're left with is that although pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And that changes your life too. Right view, if we continued right view, and remember all the Matika interconnect. So we started pursuing Nama and Rupa, and we saw that it could lead us to various, it could lead us into understanding of emptiness. It can lead us into understanding of suffering. It can lead us into understanding of no self. It can lead us into all of these different understandings. So in the purification of view, we can intellectually and to a degree, intuitively tap all of these matikas. And then the next process is through direct experience, through constantly testing these things that we've learned. So take, for example, when we come to really understand emptiness, then we test the emptiness against our experience over and over again until we come to have a very, very deep and profound understanding of it. We test impermanence against experience until we eradicate the appearance in our mind of permanence, or not of permanence, but of the enduring quality or of thingness. This is really the opposite of impermanence, is that everything is thingness. And so the realization of impermanence is to realize that there's only processes taking place, that continual change, there's only process. And so when this is understood, it can be applied, and through its application we have a direct experience of that truth. And that is how doubt is overcome, through the constant application. Meditation is a very special laboratory in which to test all of these ideas, because we calm down the activity of the mind. We learn to focus the mind. We increase the power of mindfulness. And then we turn the focused, powerful mind, the conscious awareness, on experiences as they unfold, and in this way penetrate beyond the illusions that we've been working our way towards dispelling. In meditation, you will have direct experience of impermanence, that everything is only process. And in meditation, you'll have a direct experience of emptiness. Everybody has a direct experience of emptiness all the time. They just didn't realize what it was that was happening to them always. And you will experience that the self that you think you are is a mental construct that comes up from time to time, and every time it comes up it's different than every other time. It's never twice the same. It too is a process. And in meditation, you'll have direct experiences of when the mind clings to the mental construct of self, it immediately produces a sensation of discomfort.
So do you think that what we are doing is sort of a controlled, because there actually is pain involved. You're right, it's not easy. So, and then to avoid the suffering, you're learning to focus your mind. Mm-hmm. And then, so is it sort of like a controlled nervous breakdown? Like you see that you're not who you. I mean, have you ever thought of it like that?
Well, yes, I have. There are ways of practicing which do produce what you might call a controlled nervous breakdown. But there are other ways of practicing which I prefer, which produce more of a controlled liberation, that you're like, you remember in Gulliver's Travels? He woke up and he's tied, all these little tiny ropes, and he can't move anything. I'd rather recommend you follow the path that's like having all those little ropes that bind you being cut one by one until you're finally free.
Okay, so you see it.
You can do it in a cataclysmic way.
But it can be cataclysmic to people.
And it can be it can be more cataclysmic for some people than it is for others. As a matter of fact, the more attached you are to your sense of self, the more cataclysmic it's going to be, no matter which process you follow.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
And the hardest thing of all about giving up your attachment to self is realizing that you're not giving up anything at all. It's just an illusion. You know, there's some part of your mind that's so afraid of losing this precious self that never existed anyway. You know, it's even worse than the emperor's new clothes. But that's what's liberating about it. And you see, what can be very disturbing to people is when they realize the impermanence and the suffering, and intellectually they realize that the self that they cling to doesn't really exist. But if emotionally they're still clinging to a self, then what happens is they have the experience of being a self in a world of impermanence that spells nothing but suffering, and being subject to imminent annihilation. I mean, what could be worse? I mean, that's hell. The earth is melting beneath your feet. There is no solidity, permanence anywhere. There's nothing to cling to, and anything that you do cling to burns, hurts, you know. And anything you try to cling to for safety is covered with razor blades or is red hot, you know. So this is what it means to recognize the truth of impermanence and the truth of suffering, and still be clinging to the notion of self. You are a self in this hell of dissolution and pain. And you've already seen that the self that you're clinging to some degree, you've intellectually confronted its unreality, which produces a fear, like it produces the fear of death, the fear of loss, you know. So a person that's clinging to self, yes, it's very cataclysmic, very traumatic, and it is a hopefully controlled nervous breakdown that they finally let go. But you don't have to go that way. You don't have to go that way. Fill the mind with joy and tranquility and equanimity, and confront these truths over and over again from a place of acceptance until you can get beyond the attachment and clinging. And then all that you find on the other side of that is freedom, liberation, which I think I'll tell you one last thing and then we'll call it a night.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes.
So would the antidote to that fear, it sounds like the clinging is because of the fear of letting go. And so
yeah.
I'm wondering about whether the antidote to the fear would be compassion for yourself.
Yes, that's if you can have compassion, if compassion can arise, you know, this is all the mind doing it to itself. So your mind is generating fear, and then your mind is miserable, wallowing in its own fear that it generated. So if you can cause your mind to generate compassion instead, then you've solved the problem. As a matter of fact, for meditators who are going through that kind of cataclysmic breakdown experience, what we tell them to do is do loving kindness meditation, direct it to other people, and then when you get it, you know, when it's really strong, then come back and direct it towards yourself. And it's very healing. It's very good in that way.
Thank you. That's what I thought, because you can't tell yourself, don't be afraid. That doesn't work.
That's
you know
right.
what I mean? So, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Last thing I wanted to tell you about is nirvana. Nirvana means, it literally means putting out a fire. quenching a fire. And it refers to the liberation from delusion and suffering. Now, you could easily misunderstand this, and it starts sounding like annihilation. And if you've already been wrestling with this idea that yourself is an illusion and that you might lose something that you thought you had, and then you're told that the liberation from suffering and delusion is nirvana, which is like the blowing out of a candle or the extinguishing of a fire. This could be a real, I don't think I want to go there. Quick, take me to the bar kind of situation. Right? And I have to admit, for a long time, I was really unhappy with the word nirvana and the books that I would read that would say, and interesting, if you read Buddhist books, what they'll do is on the one hand, they'll tell you these things, and then on the next page, they'll assure you, but nirvana is not annihilation. But they won't be able to tell you why it's not, because they sure made it sound like it was. And this is kind of an example. I was saying when you're trying to learn something, you're trying to understand something, and if you just can't figure it out, it just doesn't make sense. There's probably something wrong with the process by which you're trying to figure it out. And I discovered that is indeed the case. When I started learning more about the historical and cultural and philosophical background to Buddhism, at the time of the Buddha, and actually for probably 2,000 years before the time of the Buddha, probably going back 2,500 years BC, in the time of the Buddha, the view of fire and what happens when fire goes out, the philosophical and scientific understanding of what happens when you extinguish a flame is totally different than what we see. Fire is one of the elements. If you include space, there's 5 elements. Without space, there's earth, air, fire, and water. The fire is one of the 4 elements out of which everything is composed. And in the science of the time said that when you had a piece of wood that was burning, then the fire element or the heat element was bound to the fuel or attached to the fuel. And that when you put the fire out, the element cannot be destroyed. The heat element is eternal. And the heat element is also everywhere. It pervades the entire universe. So when you have a burning piece of wood, you have trapped heat element attached to the fuel. And when you put it out, you liberate the heat element, which returns to its natural state of occupying the wholeness of everything, everywhere. Okay? So, whereas we would put out a fire and it seems that it is extinguished, it is destroyed, it ceases to exist, it is no longer. It has been, in terms of our science, reduced to its component parts. There is only the soot and smoke particles in the air, the cold, charred piece of fuel, and the CO2 and other gases that are dispersed. So it is annihilated, destroyed. But this was not what was meant at the time of the Buddha. When you put out a fire, what you were doing is liberating the heat element, which returned to its natural state. A very different way of looking at things. And the word in the sequence of the word in Buddhist in the Dharma that refers to clinging and attachment is upadana. And the meaning of upadana, the oldest and most literal meaning of upadana is fuel. And in the Dharma, we talk about, because of craving, we are attached. And the continuation of the delusion that we are a separate self is because of the attachment, upadana, to the five aggregates. We are attached to the five aggregates. And in the Buddhist teaching, in the Buddha's own words, when he taught about this, he referred to them as the upadana kanda, which is translated in most English writings, and almost universally in English, except for a few things that I've seen written in just the last couple of years, as the aggregates of clinging. But in a sentence in Pali at the time of the Buddha's teaching, it would have been understood to mean bundle of fuel. So the five aggregates and the upadana in association with the five aggregates is part of the same metaphor of nirvana as the heat element. And so when we become liberated, when we overcome the delusion that we are a separate self, this destroys the upadana. This destroys, which means both attachment and fuel. It destroys the attachment and the fuel at the same time. And so the mind is like fire unbound. And that's the meaning of nirvana. Nirvana, in the original context of the language of the time, the word nirvana refers to the mind like fire unbound. Not an annihilation, but a total liberation. Okay.
I've heard a couple of things, and I've wondered a couple of things about the metaphor of fire being used. One thing I heard was, it seems strange to us, most of us come from northern climates, and if you turn the fire out or get rid of the fire, it's really cold. But in India, it's pretty warm, and so having the fire go out is not such a dangerous thing. But also, the whole Vedic, the whole Farsi, the worship prior to the Buddha, up to the time of the Buddha, was all fire-based.
Yes, that's right.
It was all fire-based. And the fact that in Buddhism, the fire, nibbana or liberation, is also the fire going out, it makes that concept much larger. It's like saying, okay, these old ways of belief are now extinguished.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what he was saying. And I've loved some of the stuff I've been reading recently. It's just so rich in that, giving the cultural context. And so much of the Buddha's teaching, he was constantly satirizing the Brahmanical belief systems of the time in one form or another. And the members of the Brahmin caste, every male Brahmin, after a certain point in his life, was responsible for keeping 3 flames going. You're absolutely right. It was to the extent of every individual Brahmin had to keep these 3 flames going. If they ever went out, it could be a really serious problem, right? And here was the Buddha talking about putting the flames out. And really, in many ways, what he was saying is, he was just saying, throw away that sacrifice-based, ritualized religion that you've been clinging to. It has no value, no basis anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's also the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion, right, that are extinguished.
Yeah.
Those fires are
Yeah,
gone.
the fires of greed, and he did refer to one of his famous teachings is called the fire sermon, where he said that everything's on fire, and that's what it's on fire with. It's on fire with greed, hatred, and delusion. And so, of course, all these teachings are they're mantikas, but the other thing about them is that they're also all interlocked metaphors as well. So when you grasp to something that's on fire, it burns you. And so grasping to that which is impermanent and without self-nature is the result. Always results in suffering. And so this is another metaphor that comes up. Everything is on fire. If you grasp onto that which is on fire, you will only get burned.